Hi everyone, and good afternoon, and also good evening, good morning for everyone. Welcome to the G Plus APAC Stakeholder Forum. Before we start, I would like to introduce briefly myself. I'm Nina Su, the HSE manager from Siemens Gamesa, and also I'm the chair of the G Plus Focal Group. Then I will be the one to leading the forum today. So first of all, I will thank you for all you attending today's forum. Thank you a lot. Before we start, we will have a few points to note. So please cooperate with us. First one is as this meeting is in Teams, so you can see the full list of attendees in the participants panel. And also please switch off your camera and microphone. And please use the chat function to ask any question. And also please state who is the question is for. And the last is the meetings are all recorded and also will be available for you to watch on demand through the Huba from Friday. And also we'll make the slide deck available through the Huba too. And so today I will here to share with you what the G Plus Focal Group been working in Japan, and also our wider plan in the region. And also then we will have a discussion on the emergency response for the offshore wind farm, especially in Taiwan. And to finish that, we will have wrap up for today's meeting by the Kate, the general manager of G Plus today. Of course, also we will have the welcome speech from our chair of the board, Jakob. So in addition to the main section today, I will like take this kind of opportunity to introduce briefly the G Plus overview with you and let you know better about G Plus, what we are doing. So I will, as you see the slide here, next slide, please. So this is the slide to show you the whole structure for the G Plus. As G Plus is a global offshore wind health and safety organization, we have the board established from the different developers and OEMs. So they are the main doing the main decision and also set up the whole strategy for G Plus. And under the board, we have the Energy Institute as a secretary support to G Plus. And then under the G Plus, you can see the three boxes here. We have three focal group. They are the US and also Europe and also APAC. So this is a focal group is established, is also in view of this is a G Plus global organization, and also in view of the footprint of the offshore wind industry, especially for APAC and US as a new market, emerging market here. So we see that is necessary to have different focal group in different regions. So the focal group mission is to take action to improve the HS in performance and also information. We can share the data in this specific region area. And so that is how we work here. So you can see the link here together with G Plus. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So what does G Plus produce? Actually, G Plus has four main work areas. The first one is incident data report. So this, by collecting all this incident data, we can help ourselves to understanding the offshore wind risk profile, and also by assess this industry healthy and safety performance here. So this is something we're doing. And also good practice guideline, which we discussed earlier, and it's a recommendation for the procedure, and also it's a set of minimum standards and expectation from the offshore wind industry. And Safe by Design workshop, which from the title you can see that we're talking about the safety design and to see the design, how we can improve the design, if any potential to improve or any potential to fail. So this could be report and can be discussed in the G Plus. And last is the toolbox stop. As you see here, is a web app. So it's the sharing the incident learning. We encourage all the members to provide all the incident sharing as a toolbox material to share with us. And the most important is it's free and free for use. Next slide, please. And about this good practice guidelines, currently G+ have the guideline as you see here. So most of them are this guideline all approved by the board and also go through by all the G+ focal group. So this is to help that the member that to improve their health and safety performance. And also this guideline is created based on this the trend and also from the work program we work out together. And now, although you can see here, we also in the process of translating all these guidelines into different language like French, German, and also Mandarin, the traditional Mandarin, and also Japanese. Especially that the four guidelines already translated in the Mandarin and 2 already translated to Japanese, and the translation is still ongoing. So next slide, please. So for that, the incident data. So it's here to show you that G+ incident data we produce for the latest one, and you also can have that one on the G+ website and show you all this data I collected from all the G+ members from all over the world, from all these members wind farm, from the construction stage to from the development stage to the decommissioning stage. So this one will be collected, and we will analyze this here, all the trend. You see the 2020 from G+ statistics. Top 3 work process, and we see the lifting operation and manual handling was the highest top hazard and risk. So basically, we will always based on this one to think about our strategy and work group for the coming year. Next slide, please. So here we also show you this is the statistics for the 2021. Hasn't been released yet, but it will be released soon. But it shows you the different region and different risk. So you can see the color chart. You see the blue line is work at high, especially it's the potential hazardous observation. So it's the main work process we need to be concerned in the APAC region. So also that's related to our guideline. This is something we already produced. Working at the high good practice guideline, and so we are still under this developer research additions. In addition, we also encourage all the members to do the self-assessment to measure their performance against this recommendation. So this is quite a quickly overview for all of you. So think about the timing. So I will just hand over that my presentation to Jakob. So, and also I hope my briefing will help you get more understanding. So, all right, so now allow me to introduce Jakob Nielsen, our chair of the G+ board. Is the Director of Health and Safety offshore at the Untitled. So, hi, Jakob, hand over to you. Thank you.
Hi, Nina. Thanks a lot, Nina. Yeah, welcome to everyone from my side as well. The discussion we had in the networking session did steal a little bit of my thunder, and I also realized that some of you joined maybe even both the core session yesterday and the US session, so there will be a little bit of repetition, but I also see that there are quite a number of new persons in this call. So I'll go ahead with my opening speech here. For those of you who are wondering, the pin I'm wearing, yesterday I was wearing it because it was International Women's Day, and it's actually a pin that we made within Vattenfall to remind us about diversity. Today I'm wearing it in general for diversity, and I think relating to the topic of the day, to bear in mind for us all that the APAC region is also very diverse. So the pin we have is to remind us that diversity is diverse. I've been involved with G+ and a lot of other different organizations since I joined the wind industry back in 2008. And back then it was clear that the industry was up and coming, but very much in its infancy. We were discussing with the regulators if a wind turbine was a building, if it was a machine, if it was a power plant, or if it was something completely different. We also struggled to apply onshore legislation on our offshore sites. One example would be in the UK, where the regulation stated that you needed to fence around your construction site, and offshore that was somehow not possible, so we had to come up with a different solution. And also to work in between legal regimes. We briefly touched on it here in the networking session as well. But specifically, one example I want to pull out is the Danish work time regulations, where, and I want to pull that out because it's actually a positive example. In Denmark, there's an offshore regulation, but it specifically says for oil and gas, and that means everything else is not covered by that, including wind farms. So the work time regulations are actually the same that applies to an office anywhere in Denmark that we had to apply to our offshore wind farms. And we actually handed in an exemption request, and we got the exemption, and now the authorities are actually working to change the legislation in Denmark to include wind farms in the offshore regime. Another example is from the US. We had the US session yesterday, and a good 8-10 years ago, I was working with what's called the National Academy of Sciences in the US to give some input to the future legislation. And at some point it was asked who is actually responsible in the US for health and safety when it comes to offshore wind. And we listed 9 different agencies that were responsible. And that is, I believe, the same case we see to some extent still in Europe, but it's improving, but very much in the APAC region, that you have different regulators in place, and it's not always clear what regime to follow. So every time we entered a new market, the discussion started all over again. Things had to be reinvented, documents had to be translated. That was I believe the example that Åsa was referring to earlier on. I remember handing in some documents in Germany, and I got a paper back saying, yes, we received your documents. But after a while, when I asked, so how far are you? What is the status? They said, well, the status is the same. We have received your documents, but we couldn't read them, so we didn't do anything. And I'm sure that will be the same in many countries in the APAC region as well, that of course you need to hand in documentation in that particular language. The other thing was that there would always be more organizations overlapping. So it would be sort of engineering societies or the National Wind Associations or other associations, and it was quite a fragmented situation. I'm sure you can recognize the situation from back then. Then there was also the whole question about defining offshore wind. The maritime industry existed, construction industry existed, not to mention oil and gas. So was wind part of an existing industry, or was it in fact a whole new industry of its own? Well, I guess now we all know the answer. The wind industry is well established, and everybody wants to join in. So back in the days, it was really about forming the DNA of an industry. It was about creating an identity and a place to feel at home. And G+ very quickly became the obvious answer to that. Now, fast forward to 2022. There's a clear consensus among the G+ board members why they joined G+ and what G+ is offering. The focus is on non-profit, it's inclusive, it's credible. The organization is bringing the industry together. It makes it easier for newcomers and companies in the supply chain to understand and to comply with the industry requirements. G+ represents the combined knowledge of the members, and indeed has a global reach. It's also independent, it's recognized by a lot of regulators, and the data sharing is what we call the jewel in the crown. Is really adding unique insights into the risks and how they develop. When I took over as chairperson in the beginning of this year, I started that by doing a consultation round with the individual board members. And it was really great to see all the commitment and all the experience and the enthusiasm. Everybody, without exception, was excited and happy about G+. And that's, of course, a great pleasure for me to see the fruits of the work done over the past years. I'm really confident that G+ will continue to gain influence internationally. In the board, we have discussed a number of strategic actions to enable us to grow and still be efficient, and also to analyze the data we have collected in a more scientific way, for example, by involving universities even more than we're doing today. And to make sure that we keep that snowball rolling by including new players from all over the world to increase our collective brain power so we can deliver world-class health and safety in a united offshore wind industry. So I'm really happy with that to welcome you all to the 2022 G+ Stakeholder Day in the APAC region. And back to you, Nina.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have Jakob to join us today. Thanks a lot. So let's move on to the next session, which is Nina, the technical director at the Equinor, will be presenting our Japan chapter for G+. Nina, hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both Nina and Jakob for the good introduction and opening up on the topic of the Asia Pacific region. Very pleased to meet you all. My name is Elena Farne. I'm a technical director for Equinor. I'm based in Tokyo, and I've been responsible for several Asia-related activity for over 3 years now on behalf of Equinor. Just let me share my screen. 1 second. Sorry. 1 second only.
We can see Elena, that looks good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, and just a couple of words. I am responsible for technical activity. I have a background for technical and commercial roles in various organizations. And I would say my first experience within health and safety was exactly with Jim. You met it before in the coffee break when working together during the construction of Westernmost Rough. And I started realizing that health and safety is about people. Introducing a little bit our activity and building on what Nina has presented so far. The focus group related to Asia Pacific has been established at the end of 2019. And after almost 2 years, we decided that perhaps was time, following some of the discussion we had before, that it was perhaps appropriate to have a more dedicated chapters. And basically a few months ago, 6 months ago, we created the Taiwan and the Japan chapter. The intention is to keep this regional outlook and try to keep the principle and the knowledge sharing across the various markets. However, we reckon that it's important to customize the discussion in relation to the specific regulator and stakeholders we have in each of them. And another item to consider is that both of these markets are in quite different development stage when it comes to offshore wind. If we are about starting operation in Taiwan, well, in Japan, we are very, very early phase. And as some of you might be aware of, the result of the first round of auction will put the commercial operation date towards the end of the decade. So this is the kind of timeline we are working towards. Then what is ahead of us? There are a lot of discussion and development ongoing in several markets, South Korea, Philippines, Vietnam and Australia. So it's also easy to think that soon our chapters will be created, where there will be a dedicated forum to engage with discussion and stakeholder. The intention is that also the good practice guidelines will be further customized, and I will go more into that later when describing what has been done for Japan so far, or what we are doing actually, and also try to learn and share from each other. I think it has been very valuable for me to be part and attending some of the Taiwanese meetings, as there are a lot of, I can see that a lot of the issue could be relevant for us in a Japanese setting moving forward. So what we have been doing in less than, I would say, less than a quarter, more or less, in Japan. So we started in September, and the first step was actually to identify who among the members would be interested in a dialogue in Japan, because we are global, but there are maybe some of the members are more active than others in a specific market. And it also came quite clear, as I mentioned before, because of the nature of the market development phase we are in Japan, that the incident data reporting, Japan specific, could be rather limited. We had a very good sharing of experience for the one wind farm under construction in Japan. That is foregoing wind turbine installation at the moment by one EPCI contractor named Kajima. And it was quite insightful to learn about some of their experience, for example, in relation to controlling the outbreak of the COVID. And then definitely about learning about how marine coordination is intended, or where are the gaps in relation to what we are expected to see coming from Europe, among others. As a further step for our activities on the good practice guidelines, we have identified some of the relevant focus areas based on the phase we are in the market, and also a little bit following what Nina has shown in the screen. What are the main areas we see particularly critical? Talking to Japan, you will think, okay, but we know everything about sea survival, right? We are on an island. That's correct, and possibly, maybe not. There is not much of a maritime industry here anymore because of the downturn of the shipyard several years ago. So that part is actually missing. And on the other side, Japan has currently a little bit less than 4 gigawatt onshore wind power capacity installed. So also some of the elements regarding working at height, etc., we shouldn't maybe consider that they are so well known and established as one might think. So some of the areas we identified as being working at heights, personal training, the related guidelines, and vessel transfer. This is also in relation to the fact that in the very early phase we might conduct for example, soil investigation and measurements, and these early activities, what could be the risk entailed to that. We have translated, as Nina mentioned, 2 of the good practice guidelines, and there is more to come for this year. We have also identified a couple of relevant stakeholders where we think we could have been a good counterpart to understand what is the status of the dialogue on health and safety and best practices. And those are the Wind Power Association, Japan Wind Power Association, sorry, and the Ministry of Land Infrastructure and Tourism. Furthermore, we are trying to expand the membership base with the local parties. So coming to some of the theme that were being discussed a little bit before, it's important that the local stakeholders and the local companies are the ones that have a know-how what is the regime that is currently in place. So it's good to hear their voice and their opinion as well. So we had the 2 guest participants, 2 Japanese company, Renova and JERA. Although they currently they're not a member in our organization yet. So what's cooking now? We have a lot of activities ongoing. Still, the incident data reporting will be rather limited, as I mentioned before, and we have several guidelines to be translated into Japanese. We hope that this effort, as some of you was mentioning before, you need to talk the local language. So it's important that also when trying to communicate with the supply chain and contractors, then we are able to share the best practice in a comfortable way. Thank you, Christy. Further to that, we have initiated a work stream for customization or localization that is going to be taking place in the first half of this year, in particularly related to integrated offshore wind emergency response. Further to that, we have the other items that were identified as relevant last year. We are also preparing for local market condition. There are a marine coordination study, and also in relation to the development for earthquake areas, which I don't think it has been done for Taiwan yet. Last but not least, we are seeking to contribute and influence the ongoing work stream in the Japanese industry. We have initiated the dialogue with the Japan Wind Power Association, and we hope that we could be a good counterpart for continuing dialogue and influencing the work stream related to safety and technical items. Further to that, we have performed a review of guidelines issued by MLIT. However, we understand that these are intended to stay as guidelines and they are not going to be further amended. So this activity is closed as it is, and we will perform continuous gap analysis between what are the Japanese offshore wind related regulations, those that will come in the future, and what are the international ones, and if there is any action for us to try to take on. Yeah, we will keep to expand and our membership base and try to have a more standard outreach when it comes to the various stakeholders. So there are a number of players within the Japan offshore wind power sector that are particularly relevant. Those that, for example, have been having a leading role in the round one auction. That certainly will be the first one to be involved in actual construction activities. And also the Japan Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare. Last but not least, I think maybe that's something more that we have been looking at and has also been mentioned before. We have an open recruitment, ongoing recruitment, and there is also a link in the chat looking for an APAC representative for the G+ with fluency, obviously not only in Japanese, but from our standpoint here in the chapter, is particularly important that to be having a meaningful influence and a liaison function towards the various organization. The fluency in the local language is paramount. And last but not least, we understand that also GWO is looking for a local representative. So that will probably strengthen our ability to connect locally. So I think that was all from me, and I will leave the word back to Nina. Thank you.
Thank you, Alina. Thanks for your great section. So, okay, so let's move on. So go to the next section. Next section will be David Collins. So he is the HSE Director in COP, the Zhongren Offshore Wind Farm in Taiwan. So, David, hand over to you.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I shall just try and share my screen, which I think I've done. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can see the safety moment. Yeah.
Right. OK, so thanks for this. I'm starting with this safety moment. I've been presenting this for a few years now, and quite frankly, I'm running out of audiences for it, even though I've recently changed companies. So it's just an observation about what happened to me when I first came to Taiwan. And I was thinking the first person or the HSE manager I met was Nina, and probably the second was Soren. But at the company I was at the time, they were kind of obsessed by earthquakes, and they were always saying to me, what are we going to do about earthquakes? Not particularly the Taiwanese, but a lot of the people from Europe coming over. And I was asked to do many strange things, brief, very important people who came out, and before COVID, we were getting like 20 visitors a week. So I decided to look at, really what were the chances of anything really bad happening. So I checked out Taiwan's earthquake recent stats, and there was a very bad earthquake in 1999 where 2,415 people died. But in this sort of decade or this century, I should say, there's actually been 160 earthquake deaths in Taiwan, and there have been a few sort of serious ones in 2016 and then one in 2018. But then I decided to look at how many deaths had been on the road, and in that same period where there'd been 160 earthquake deaths, there'd been actually 66,000 traffic deaths, with about 3,000 people dying every year on the road. So it kind of, for me, put that in perspective, and I'm definitely not trying to decry what you need to do in an earthquake, and you should always be prepared and have your grab bag ready to leave your apartment. If there is a bad earthquake, and everybody knows about drop, cover, and hold on. But really, if somebody was going to say to me, what's the best advice you can give anybody in the event of an earthquake, I would still say be careful how you cross the road, because that's really where the risk lies, looking at these figures anyway. So I haven't got many more slides on emergency response. I've just got really some general observations before I understand we go into a general discussion. And the first one is this sort of coordination, cooperation and communication. And this is a real incident that happened. And there was a vessel doing some drilling, and it got stuck on the drill pipe. Unfortunately, the clamp got stuck and the tide came up, and the vessel was nowhere near close to sinking. But it was fully evacuated, and we've got a picture of the evacuation on the right-hand side. And there was no loss of life, and the vessel was recovered eventually, and everything went well. But there was one problem, and I'd like Nina to help me with this, please. If you could just pronounce this for me, please, Nina.
Yeah. 我不说中文.
Which means, I think, I don't speak Chinese.
Yes. I don't speak.
And that was because we'd hired this vessel from a local Taiwanese company, and it was a Taiwanese flagged vessel, but actually nobody on the vessel, not the crew or the drilling crew, spoke any Chinese. The crew was Indonesian because it had previously been an Indonesian vessel, and the drilling crew were Malaysian. So actually communicating with the Coast Guard did become quite difficult. And that was probably one of the reasons we think why they fully evacuated, and the captain didn't stay on the vessel. The captain thought he was being told to get off the vessel, but maybe he wasn't. And like I say, it didn't cause a problem, but it was something that we thought about afterwards, and made us realise that, if you've got a Taiwanese flagged vessel or any vessel and you've got to communicate with the Coast Guard, then it's probably better to have somebody there who can actually do that in their language. So that was a bit of a learning, and it did come, that came out in the full investigation that was carried out. But generally, ERP fundamentals, I was just writing a list. A lot of these were off the top of my head, and I've been looking at emergency response procedures in COP. They were certainly started by Soren, and I'm kind of just reviewing them now. And I think for me, one of the things is to keep the procedures clear and really simple. Make sure the information or the contact details are accurate and up to date, so as that when you do bring these procedures into play, you get in touch with the right people. Familiarization is important for all those involved, and you can do that during kickoffs and inductions and toolbox talks, and making sure that everybody is aware and they know what the process is in the event of them being used. If you've got a crisis or an emergency response team identified within the emergency response process or procedure, then they've got to be adequately trained so they can deal with it, and they don't just get a phone call out of nowhere saying, oh, by the way, you're now in this crisis team and you need to meet up and you need to do something. It is important that they're made aware. Engaging with the authorities, and letting them know about the emergency response plan, and the fact that they might get a call and that this is our process. In the UK, you know, this works pretty well with the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, but I would say it's just certainly in Taiwan, it's a kind of nascent process. It's relatively new. And then, of course, it's always good to have regular drills on the site or the vessel to make sure that if people can train to actually go through the process of the emergency response. So summing those up, I would say in 3 words: keep it simple, make sure it's well communicated, and keep it well and get it adequately drilled as well. And then just finally, just with these more thoughts than a presentation, equipment's got to be well maintained and effective. If you've got rescue equipment, it's got to be good. And this is what we saw down at the harbour. This was works being carried out at the harbour at Taichung, and the company doing this had been asked to supply a rescue boat, and this is what they put on the side of the quay. We sort of inspected this in February 2021. That was before I came back from Taiwan the first time. And I'm not even sure if that would have floated. I actually said to the manager of the site, I said, are you really telling me you're going to put that in the water to rescue your boss if your boss was in the water? And to be fair to the company, they did replace this quite quickly with a proper rib with a motor that you could put in the water quickly to carry out a rescue. So I think if those 3 fundamental basics on the ERP and good equipment to be used in the event of an emergency are all put together, then there's a good chance that it's all going to work anyway. So that's it. I was presented when I left Taiwan with a photo of me walking away in disgust from that particular craft there, which I have on my wall back in the UK. Okay, so I'll just hand that back now and open it up for some discussion, I think.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, and good to get your experiences so far from Taiwan as well, and obviously conscious that you've got a lot of experience from Europe before that as well, so a good contrast. And I guess it's worth flagging that we do have the G+ emergency response good practice, and as that was flagged yesterday on the core event, it was written and it was tried to become global, but I guess it doesn't quite fit that bill. So we've actually brought a consultant on board to make it better fit for the APAC region and also for North America. So that's what we're currently working on at the moment. So we've really got a chance to change that document, and we welcome anyone's input in that. So it'd be great to hear from the group your thoughts about emergency response and how it differs in the region and what more we want and need to do, really. I'll hand over to you guys, and we did have a bit of chat in the breakout session earlier about that as well, actually, so perhaps we can carry on the sort of discussion we started there as well. So anyone want to raise their hand to add? So Alex.
Good morning. Good afternoon, Kate. How are you?
Great, thanks, Alex. Do you want to introduce yourself for everyone?
Yeah, I just put my camera on. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. If I can, Kate, it'd be great just to introduce myself quickly. And really, I'm picking up on, I think, Jim's point on emergency response, and really keen to see if we can get a discussion going on this. So very quickly, my name's Alex Spencer. I work for APITO, based in Aberdeen. From an APITO standpoint, some of you might be aware of what we do from the oil and gas perspective. But what I was hoping to do, Kate, is wondering if we could discuss some of the major emergency management aspects. And, I think what I'm very keen, and, I know Jakob started off with, if there are aspects in oil and gas, there might be transferable over to offshore wind, but it shouldn't always be, well, this is the way we've done it in oil and gas, and this is the way it must be done on offshore wind. They're separate industries. And what I wanted to raise is, from an APITO standpoint, we've been looking at how we manage major emergency in the offshore oil and gas sphere for some time. There's training standards that assess competence. Well, there's assessment standards for competence and a training standard for major emergency management. In the North Sea, there's set guidelines by ERVA, the Emergency Response and Rescue Vessel Association, that captures some of the points that Dave was mentioning about the equipment that's required for emergency response. And I'm wondering whether or not Jakob mentioned about learning and putting things on the table, wondering whether or not some of those points might be things that we could discuss. And from our point of view, from an APITO standpoint, there are options of and standards available to look at how we might be able to do that in the offshore wind space. So it was really just to try to introduce what we're doing and see if that might be of interest to people on the call to gain more information, Kate. That's really what I was trying to do. So I'll pause there.
Great, thanks, Alex. And Søren, were you picking up on what Alex has said?
Yes, partly on that. Yes, I think that the easiest part that is for us to agree on what to do and what we have been doing within Europe and transfer that to Asia. I think in the AG plus APAC focal group, we've been doing a lot of that and focusing on how we get synergies on rescue setup between the developers. The really big challenge out here, without doubt, been the authorities to get a commitment from Coast Guard to what is exactly they can and will do, and what is it the National Airborne Service will do with the helicopter. That is where we've been struggling for, almost the whole period out here. Been here almost 4 years, 3.5 years now, and I still think it's an issue to get that clear commitment. Can we rescue from the top of a turbine and all that with a helicopter? And that is what's taking the time out here to get that clear commitment. What is it that the authorities can and will do?
And Jakob?
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting, Søren, because that's exactly the same discussions that we've had in Germany for a long time. The German support from Coast Guard or Army is very limited, and the legislation says it's actually the responsibility of the developer, the wind farm owner, to ensure a rescue chain all the way to the hospital. So I'm just thinking, that it's. I fully understand the concern there, and maybe there are, or I'm sure there are some lessons learned that we can pull out of the European market there as well. And then, as you mentioned, in other countries, we also have the discussion, if you have emergency services provided from the authorities, for example, what exactly does that mean? Does that mean that you can really count on them? Do you have to have a redundant setup? Do they actually go into the turbine? Do they go into the tower? Do they, what capabilities do they have? And then, not to mention the whole insurance system, who's covering that in the background. So so I don't have the magic solution for that, but I can totally relate to the discussions and
it is. And out here, the only one allowed to operate a rescue helicopter is the National Airborne Service. So even though that we have a helicopter for crew transfer, we are legally not allowed to use that for rescue operation. If we have a rescue operation, I think we most likely will do it anyway if we have an issue. But from a legal point of view, it's only the National Airborne Service that can do it.
And that's sort of the, let's say, one side of the problem. The other side of the problem is that we've seen in Germany that it's not regulated. The owner of the wind farm is responsible, and there's no requirements to the helicopters, for example. So you can just buy any kind of helicopter as a rescue helicopter. And that's, of course, where we talk about we need to have a lower level that companies needs to comply with.
Yeah.
Alex?
If I may come back in, Kate, Jakob, nice to meet you. So, and thank you for your comments. I'm wondering, are there two conversation strands here, Kate? Are there strands on the actual emergency response in a different region in regards to helicopters and the lifeboats and the coast guards? And I'm wondering is there another conversation strand maybe linked to your best practice guidance on how we expect or how we would want our staff and our employees to react in an emergency and manage that from a company point of view? And I think probably there's, in my mind, that those might be different strands of discussion, and that training standard, that global standard of how to respond to an emergency would be one thing. And it's very similar to some of the things that we've spoken about over the last few years in oil and gas. Is you know, the MCA and the way the Coast Guard agency respond in the UK is very different to the response in America and into AP in the AP region. So I'm just wondering, are there two strands of discussion here in regards to the physical rescue and then the actual training of our staff? You know, Dave touched on emergency response plans and how you coordinate that from a company perspective, and I'd be keen to get thoughts on that.
Jakob?
Yeah, no, I don't want to hijack the whole meeting, but I think it's fundamentally it's about risk bundling, because you have a risk with people being out there, and you see it in other industries. There's one example from Denmark. There's a big bridge and a tunnel it was built like 20 years ago. And in Denmark, the regions are responsible for emergency services. And then, of course, if you introduce a huge tunnel for cars and trains, then the regional authorities are not equipped to handle this kind of thing. So you need to look at that from an overall perspective and say, okay, we need to upgrade the resource in that area. You see the same if you put an oil refinery in a location. Then, of course, you need to take a discussion in that region. How do we deal with that risk that is introduced in this area? And that is exactly the same in the wind industry. When we introduce a wind farm somewhere or an entire wind industry, how do we then deal with the new risk that we now have, that we might have people 100 miles offshore that actually are in need of emergency services? And then whether that is covered by an insurance company, whether it's covered by the government, whether it's covered by the industry, it's always the risk bundling that is the issue, because no one company can take on that risk. That's just not realistic. And so in most countries, the authorities step in, and then there's some kind of financing via some kind of tax or whatever it is. And out of that then comes, okay, to what extent do we then need to train the people in the offshore industry? What kind of equipment do we need to have in place? But I think, as Søren also indicates, it sort of starts with what level can we expect from the authorities, and what is then the delta to the level that we actually want to have in place. And that's why it's difficult to move that discussion forward, because if you don't have someone starting that from authority side saying, okay, this is where the risk lies financially, these are the people who need to take that risk, then you don't get the things in place, and then it's difficult. Then the delta is everything, and it's difficult to get started.
And Jim, be good to hear from you. I know you had strong thoughts on this earlier, and it sounds like you were at the emergency response breakout group yesterday, so be great to hear from you.
Yes, thank you, Kate. So I agree with Alex. There's actually 2 or 3 strands here. The first strand is, for me, let's standardise the requirement for the minimum requirement for what we need on the turbine. And what I mean by that is so when we take the person off the turbine, it could be by a vessel, it could be by a helicopter. That's one element. But where a lot of the confusion is the wind farms are going further far shore now. So you've got the reaction time to get how let's say the emergency response get to the turbine. So what we should have is a standard or a very robust guideline that says the minimum requirement is an hour. Let's say this is the golden hour. For them people to be on that turbine, they must have this level of qualification. They must be able to get that person to the heli deck or the TP from. They must have this level of equipment on there, and the further we go away from the shore, the time to actually rescue, to get a helicopter or a vessel there, it takes longer. So as we go further out, the requirement needs to become more robust and more stringent. At the moment, we're still working to, let's say, our industry, some of the industry leaders say, no, we've got the golden half hour where somebody to initiate the rescue, but we haven't been strict. That was created when we was, for instance, 8 kilometers off the coast. Now we're 50-60 kilometers off the coast, so we need to be more robust with that. the emergency response plan is, yeah, it's always going to be down to the asset owners. We need to be the guidelines for that. Then we need to know what the helicopter, I'm not say helicopter, search and rescue, the vessel requirements. What we need? Do we need? I'm going to use the word guard vessel. So when we're far shore, do we need another guard vessel out in the field to ensure that we can get somebody to a safe place? Because if you go to the Peto Gardens, a safe place is not a vessel, is not a CTV, which is predominantly used out in the field. So we need to firm these requirements up, because then it makes it easier for all stakeholders on the assets to know what their requirement is in their emergency response plan. But as I stated earlier, when you get everybody into the room, and I've done 7 of these, 8. I was a regional manager for the East Coast hub, where we're now a hub. It becomes very difficult because you've got multiple stakeholders, all with a different interpretation of what is required. Because the guidelines and the standards, the vessel masters always want to use the Peto because they come from oil and gas, but it sometimes isn't applicable for the wind industry. So I think we need to look at what we've got and then see what works. And then, as Jakob said, each wind farm is slightly individual, but that individuality bit is then down to the company to put over and above requirements in there and do the let's say risk assessment for it. But we need to be, I feel we need to be a bit sharper of what the requirements is. Once you've set them standards, they should be able to transfer through the industry. The actual EVAC, let's call it, and who's going to do that is regional, is national, isn't it? So I think we need to start at the beginning to create the standard which they can go through the industry, like the Peto standard has done in the North Sea. And like I say, that's just my, well, it ain't just my, it's every safety case I've sat on. Everybody said the same, and I've done 7. I've done 7 in the last 8 years, and the problem just keeps arising. Sorry, not the problem, that's the wrong word. The concern needs to keeps getting brought up, because everybody's got a different interpretation of it. Sorry, Kate, I can't hear you.
Thank you. I think yesterday you heard from Pete Lawson at the MCA, Jim, about the exercise Sancho that they're planning in the UK, and the G+ are supporting that, but we're really keen that the lessons learned from that, and also the planning that goes into it, is linked with different regulators across the world. And we're conscious that the HSE and OSHA in Taiwan already have a relationship and an agreement, and I'm hoping that that can just be rolled across almost informally from the MCA to Coast Guard in Taiwan, in Japan, wherever. Do you think, Jim, that that's feasible from what you heard yesterday?
There wasn't that much detail given during
okay.
So
okay, yeah, so there's an exercise going on.
Quite high of what there was hoping to achieve, but the level of detail for me to say, oh yeah, I think it's transferable, it didn't go to that much.
Sure. Okay.
So.
Okay. So I'm hopeful that that can be transferred, and that was kind of the condition of G+ supporting the MCA with that, was that it could be looked at globally, and so we'll certainly try and make that happen. So, I'm conscious, Eskild, you're in the screen now, and I think we've also got Kellyanne from Ørsted on the line as well. So welcome, Eskild.
Just my two cents on the conversation here. I was also in the same group as you know. I think the lessons learned that we talked about around communication and how we set it up, I think that would be very valuable across different organizations, fully understanding or going into details on how is it that we, how is it that we plan and communicate. I definitely think that's something that will be transferable.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Eskild. So I think there's a lot for us to work on there, definitely, but unfortunately we're running out of time. But if you're interested in this topic, welcome to join us. As I say, it's something we're working on across the globe this year. Definitely a big area for us to look into. And This brings to a close the 2022 Stakeholder Forum. This is our last session, so really appreciate everyone's involvement. We've learned so much and definitely lots for us to be working on and lots of ideas. Fortunately, it's all recorded, so everything's been recorded and all the presentations, they're all available on Hoover, so you can go on now and find them, and this will be added to it as well. And there's also quite a lot of discussions that have started up there, so it'd be great if we can have some APAC discussions on there as well. Emergency response, I think, is already on there, so please add your thoughts there, and we're capturing all of them as well and putting them to the different focal groups for us to work on over the course of 2022. But thanks everyone, thanks for everyone's contributions.